Hello everybody, Robert Taylor with the American Classic Heritage Show. Can you believe we're getting ready to start on our second season of the American Classic Heritage, and we sure hope that you'll be able to watch it. Thanks for watching. Hello everybody, this is Robert Taylor with American Classic Heritage, and we're here today with the Shotwell family, and we're glad to have them. They're going to tell us about this A400 they got, and it's got a unique motor in it. Can you believe the motor was made in Russia? Well, it was, and Mike knows all about this car and his wife, so they're going to tell us all about it, so sit back and enjoy.
Hello, I'm Mike Shotwell, and I wanted to thank Robert for the introduction. This is our A400 Model A. This was an interesting car with a long, interesting history in the Model A world. And Robert talked a little bit about the Russian engine and so forth. Well, there's a lot of aspects of this car that are interesting, and one of them is that it's a California car, and we were able to trace this car back into the 50s. And then it was purchased by a couple of owners, and then the major restoration was done on it in the 1970s, in the, well, I would say the late 60s and going into the early 70s. And it was put into a book by Ray Baker, a famous book on Model A's, the first book on Model A's, where they featured this exact car back in 1972. But what was not in the book were all the interesting interior things with this car. And this got into this situation with the Russian engine because the restorer, who was a very well-known restorer at the time, who had won a lot of awards in the beginning in the Model A world with Mark and Mafka, the two Model A organizations. And he had come across in 1965 65 engines that were shipped out of Russia. He was planning when he was doing the restoration, and it arrived just in time for him. And he took those engines, and they opened the crates down at Ford Obsolete in California, a very famous early supplier of Model A goods. And they took their crowbars and opened these incredible crates, and the engines were inside it, shipped through Czechoslovakia from Russia, because going back into the history of these cars, Henry Ford is the man who actually established the Russian Detroit, they call it, the Russian Detroit, near Moscow, about 200 miles away from Moscow. And they had a non-competition agreement. After the war and after the Korean War, these were surplus, these engines, and they were what's called Model B engines. They were the higher development of the Model A engine. And so the 65 of these were surreptitiously shipped through Czechoslovakia from Russia, and they arrived in Long Beach, California, and voila, we have one in this car. It was installed in this car. The nice part about it is it's a very powerful engine. This car can run quite a bit quicker than a normal Model A. But Mr. Dave Treichel, who was the owner who did the restoration, was a meticulous restorer. And he took this car, they painted it. They had one of the top body guys fixing bodies in California at the time, and they were very close friends, and they all got together and worked on this car. And we've been able to actually trace back into the 60s the people that worked on this car, two other people who actually worked on this car that I've spoken with. They're now in their 80s. And it was wonderful to add to the history of it. The Russian engine is interesting because, being a Model B, it they were able to improve this engine, and we'll take a look at that engine in a little while to show you how different. It looks like a Model A engine, but it's actually a more powerful engine. And what I thought would be interesting is to take a look at the Russian markings that we first noticed. And if you look closely, you can see the M for Molotov. This was Stalin's right-hand man who they created the factory in his honor. And you can see an M, and then there's a Russian word coming along here, which you'll see you'll see a photo of that. But here's that M. Now, if I push my finger down there, you can probably see the raised lettering on the casting. It was getting, by this time, this was cast so late that they were getting worn down, all the markings. But here you can see it. You can still see it. He also did other interesting things that I'm sure we're going to get into about this car. Other things that were installed on this car. It was put together with actual Model A parts rather than replacement parts that were done in subsequent years. This car is just an actual showcase for original parts, original Model A parts. And that's one of the things that makes a car stand out. We also are interested in the transmission in the car that Mr. Treichel put in it. It's a synchro mesh transmission, a 1939 Ford that makes it much easier to drive, and boy does my wife love that, and so do I, as a matter of fact. And it has hydraulic brakes that were put into it, which are a little safer than the mechanical brakes, more modern. You know, now they're very much outmoded, but it was, for that time, it was better. And also has a steering with a Ford F100 steering box in it, which makes it a little easier to drive. So this car is an absolute joy on the road and tours, and we love to drive this car. This is not a car that it's been shown at national conventions and so forth, but we do enjoy driving the car. All right, I'd like to show you the book, the actual book that was published in 1972. This was by Ray Miller, and once again, it was called Henry's Lady. And this really was the first galvanizing book to the public about Model A Fords, because prior to that, they were sort of just fun cars for people in the 60s and 50s. I bought my first Model A when I was 13 for $50 back in 1955. And sold it. I destroyed the car as a kid, and 3 years later I sold it to a junkyard for $5. I've been paying penance ever since, let me tell you, for the cars that we're getting now. I sure love to have that car back too. But this was the book that came out that really changed the Model A collecting world. And this particular car, this A400, was used. It's a convertible sedan, and which is the only Model A made like this, where you can the windows roll up and it still has a top that goes down. There's no other Model A that's made like this, and that's what they made it so unique. And I'll talk about that in a second. The book, the fun thing about the book is that it illustrates every Model A type of car, which nobody really understood. And at the time that this car came out, there were only about 7 of them known in the world. I'm the ex-president of the A400 group, and it's an international group, and we've been able to track only about 125 of these cars around the world that are actually drivable. There are more known. There are about 300 known, but some of them are pickup trucks, and their tops were cut off. They were made into hot rods and other things like that. But actual running A400 automobiles, about 125. So it's an extremely rare car. Far more rare, for instance, than a Duesenberg or something like of that nature. You know, a very, very expensive car. this book and in the A400, they conveniently left out the fact that he had upgraded the brakes and the transmission. But that didn't care because it looks the same. When you look at this car, you can't tell the difference. So but they did it for safety and made it a speedier car too. So that works very well. To talk a little bit and to understand the history of what happened with Model A Fords, Henry Ford built these cars between 1928 and 1931, and this was built in 1931, and they only built this car for about half a year. And remember that the Depression struck in 1929, so this is 1931, and you're talking about some serious, serious problems. This car, these cars, he took a couple of models of Model A's, and he sort of spiced them up, and he put side mounts on them on both sides, and they were able to make them look richer than a normal Model A. And with the Depression there, and people that owned Packards couldn't afford Packards anymore, so they wanted to buy a little spiffier type of Model A. It still didn't work very well because the Depression just destroyed everything. So, but they did make these cars for, as I said, about 5 months. What happened with Henry Ford is that he began working on the factory. They began working on the V8 engines, which came out in 1932. You know, you all probably know about the Deuce Coupe, or the Little Deuce Coupe, or the Deuces, they called them, the 1932s, that had the 60 horsepower V8 engines in them. And so the Model B engine was developed around the same time because Henry Ford wanted to continue with the 4-cylinder engines, but he was forced by his son and by other people to move into the V8 world. But they had these Model B technology out. Now, he was now going to move into a new phase of car that was a faster car, more modern car. And well, what do you do with all this equipment, this Model A equipment that they had in the factories, in the River Rouge plant, and all of this huge operation that they had? So they transferred over. It took them, I think it was about 9 months or something, to transfer over to the new form. They actually shut the factory down. But in the meantime, he has all this Model A equipment. So what does he do? He ends up, the Russian government, and Henry Ford was very, very, very opposed to Stalin and the communists and the Russian government. However, they were waving a lot of money at him, and he took advantage of it. They purchased all of this equipment and an agreement for 75,000 cars. And this was during the Depression years, and this was a lot of money. And they opened up a new factory, and they even worked with an American company to go to Russia to build the new Russian Detroit. And it was about, as I said, it was about 200 miles away from Moscow at the time. They uplifted a village, moved all the people out. They didn't care about them. They just gutted the place, and they built in 1 year. They started in 1930. In 1931, they completed a new town of about 35,000 people to build these cars. But basically what Henry Ford did was build cars, put them in crates and move them over, and the Russians just assembled them and then pretended that they were manufacturing cars for several years. About 2,000 American workers went over, between 2,000 and 3,000 actually, that went over there to join this new wonderful world of socialism and this new communist world that was going to be so wonderful for everybody. And very few of those, once they were there, they paid them a lot of money. They worked for a year. They got everything going for several years. And then, of course, the mid-30s came along, and Stalin and the Great Terrors and the destruction of humanity that went on in Russia. But these cars were actually being built, and they continued building these engines because they were so practical. And that went they did that all the way through the Korean War when the Russians came down to support the North Koreans, communist government, and with China, and we had the Korean War fought over the 38th parallel and what was going to take place in the expansion of communism in Asia. So these engines came out that were surplus engines, and they built these, and they worked very well in the Korean War. And we actually have pictures of the Jeeps and all, and there've been some really interesting work done on it. Where all of these Jeeps, where are they today? There's only a few of them, but these engines, I mean, they have an insignia on the side of the engine from Molotov, an M, and then the timing gears, it's in honor of Molotov. And if any of you can pull your history books out and understand who Molotov was, he was the bloody right hand of Stalin, who probably signed something like 2 million warrants, death warrants himself. And so these are called fondly by the early researchers the communist engines. And as I said in the article that we wrote on it, I said we're happy to have a communist engine, but we don't want the political aspects to go along with it. So I'd like to now bring my wife into this. We're a partnership, and we're into this car and all of our cars and our collections. We're into it very much together, and she drives all these cars, and well, we enjoy them immensely. And so I'm going to bring her in now to say a few words about the car and her enjoyment of them and so forth.